I can feel very high.
It's a new day on the Enterprise and we're flying towards a rather impressive-looking swirly. Not that the crew are watching, because most of them are unconscious. T'Pol's awake though and recording a handy log to explain to the viewers that we're heading for a black hole, and the crew were knocked out by a mystery condition after we decided to pop over for a look. Flashback time, and T'Pol's telling Archer about a black hole near us. This is no normal black hole though, as there are 2 stars in the same system that haven't yet done a dead, a combination even the Vulcans haven't properly surveyed. We'll have to approach slowly because of gravity reasons, but as it sounds pretty weird, Archer agrees to give it a poke. While T'Pol goes off to do some actual work, Archer collars Tucker about his chair. It's not particularly comfortable, he says, so Tucker agrees to drop all of the stuff that stops the ship from exploding and take a look. Odd jobs are the order of the day, it seems. Reed wants to talk about a security thing, Hoshi's covering for the chef because he's ill, and Archer wants to write a foreword to go in a biography of his dad. He's been struggling with how to condense what he wants to say, but a little pointer from T'Pol gives him a good place to start. As Hoshi makes a similar start on her meal for the crew, a family recipe apparently, Travis is visiting Phlox. He's got a headache and wants medicating, but Phlox insists on taking a closer look. Probably wise, given that Travis was turned into a meat computer a few episodes back, so he starts analysing, despite Travis's concern about wanting to get back to work. He's not the only person being interrupted. Tucker tinkering with the captain's chair isn't exactly quiet, so T'Pol's forced to bugger off to her quarters to carry on working. At least Reed's able to do his job. He wants to implement a new procedure for when shit goes south, something that'll turn on all of our offensive and defensive systems at the drop of a hat. Archer's not sold on the idea, as it all feels a bit military, but he's willing to let Reed see what everybody else thinks, as long as we don't call it battle stations. We're supposed to be an exploration vessel, so that's just bad PR. Hoshi's meal is proving popular. Well, among the people not distracted by other things anyway. Tucker's decided his work on the captain's chair might as well include some upgrades, and Reed's trying to think of a different name for his proposed security setting. Neither has much time for the other's problem, and it's getting a little prickly before Hoshi interrupts to ask if they enjoyed their meals. Reed didn't have much of his, and after a bit of badgering, says he thought it was overly salty. Tucker and Reed depart to work on their projects, leaving Hoshi to worry about hers. There's distraction elsewhere on the ship. Travis is still trying to get back to work, but Phlox insists on keeping him in. Phlox is convinced there's something wrong despite a lack of evidence, so he's going to run every test he can think of. And Archer's getting a touch obsessed by his writing as well, to the point where he's neglecting to feed Porthos, dog in space. At least T'Pol's remembered what we're supposed to be doing this week. In fact, she's called Tucker to bring some tech for identifying the weird science wibblies our target black hole seems to be farting out. He's got no time for that and becomes quite angry at having his work on the chair interrupted, so much so that T'Pol becomes concerned about his behaviour. He has another pop at her and stomps off, leaving T'Pol confused. Unreasonable behaviour is present in sickbay too. Phlox has been prodding all night long, but found nothing. That's why he wants to crack open Travis's skull and see what might be causing the headache that way. Travis attempts to leave, not because this is clearly fucking bonkers, but rather because he's worried about getting in trouble for missing his shift. Phlox relents and says he'll just give Travis something for the pain instead. This, of course, is a lie, and Travis is knocked out so Phlox can perform his brainial surgery in peace. And peace may be in short supply if Reed gets his way. He's been working on his new tactical alert and can't decide on which nauseatingly grating alarm he wants to use. Tucker's entirely uninterested because he's still obsessing over the chair, so Reed gets annoyed and leaves. There's similar annoyance in the mess hall, as Hoshi's obsession over perfecting her meal means she hasn't actually served anything to the people who are waiting. Somebody trying to raise this point pisses her off, and she throws him out of her borrowed kitchen. Access is a problem in the armory too. T'Pol wants to talk to Reed, but he's more interested in telling her the armory is now a restricted area and requires the access code that he just sent to her. He's also now armed, a part of his increasingly comprehensive new protocol, and he doesn't seem to care that Archer hasn't actually given him the okay to implement it yet. Archer's too soft on such things, he says, so if he needs to force the issue, he will. Faced with the prospect of arguing the point with an armed and erratic arsehole, T'Pol wisely decides to just bugger off instead. Back in the present, T'Pol's recording that her encounter with Reed was around the time she realized everybody but her was turning proper weird, and that included Archer. Flashback again, and Archer's trying to read his brief book introduction to Tucker, all 19 pages of it. Tucker's opinion is negative, partly because it's interrupting his work on the chair, and Archer buggers off in a huff. Visiting the kitchen for a snack doesn't help improve his mood, as Hoshi's still obsessed with perfection. T'Pol's attempt to talk to Archer is interrupted by an alarm, and he trots off to the bridge. He need not have bothered, as it's just a test. One read says everybody failed. Archer doesn't have time to be annoyed by this, as Tucker pulls him aside to show him plans for the entirely redesigned new chair. Reed takes issue with this, and the two start a Barney, forcing Archer to intervene. With them both firmly admonished, he tells T'Pol he doesn't want to be bothered unless the universe is ending. He's understandably a bit pissed off when she bothers him later anyway. She tries to explain that some very serious shit indeed is going down, but he doesn't care. He needs to write this introduction, and he'll lock her up if that's what it takes to be left alone. T'Pol decides to ask Phlox for help instead, and manages to arrive at sickbay just as Phlox is about to crack open Travis's skull. An attempt to convince him this might not be the best course of action results in a threat towards her, so she pretends to comply, then gives him a Vulcan neck massage so he can have a nap. With our medical expert out of the picture, T'Pol decided to start scanning the crew herself, which none of them resisted due to being unconscious. This research, according to current T'Pol as we rejoin her recording her log, was actually made easier by Phlox's obsession with Travis's head as he kept detailed records. A ping from the computer gives her the analysis she's been working on. Long story short, the black hole and its mates are giving out dangerous science wibblies, and turning around right now won't work because that'll take another 2 days, and the wibblies are killing everybody but her. The good news is there's a course without the wibblies that we could fly along. The bad news is it's on the other side of the black hole and its mates, which obviously will be a bit of a bugger to fly through. It's worth a go though, so as Travis is both sedated and in a head brace, T'Pol decides to try waking Archer instead. Tossing him in the shower helps clear his head enough to absorb what's being said. Once it's been explained to him that turning around is not an option, and Travis isn't available to fly the ship while T'Pol charts a course, up to the bridge we go. Archer's still not 100% and makes a few oopsies at the helm. A rather large rock threatens to make life both difficult and short, but an impact on the hull triggers Reed's new security alert. The guns come online automatically, meaning we can now poop our rock problem away. It's plain sailing from there, and once we hit the safe zone and Scarpa, everybody starts waking up. Phlox is checking Travis over, though not quite so thoroughly this time. The dangerous science wibblies haven't rendered any lasting damage, save for the steady trickle of people with minor injuries from when they were rendered unconscious. Reed summoned by Archer to talk about his new tactical alert. The bollocking he expects doesn't come, and he's delighted to learn it was actually useful. It still needs work, but Archer can see the value of it now. Tucker's project has reached completion as well, though not in quite as much depth as he'd planned. It turns out Archer's discomfort was because the chair was ever so slightly too high, so he just lowered it. Job done. And job done for Archer's book introduction too, so we'll leave T'Pol to tolerate being his proofreader as we get ready to take another step on the long road. Star Trek stories where the rest of the crew must be saved by a single unaffected person are hardly new. Hell, they're not even new in Enterprise. We already did this back in the Season 1 episode Acquisition, where Tucker was the last man standing after everybody else got gassed. Having a mysterious or nefarious condition that sidelines most of the crew is an idea you can identify in quite a few Star Trek series. A cynical observer might suggest this is because the premise gives writers a way of focusing on fewer characters without needing to place them in a different location, thus avoiding the costs associated with building new sets. Whatever the reason for its popularity, we've been served another, and today's choice of saviour is T'Pol. While everybody else goes 10 different flavours of weird, she's immune to the effects of black hole wibblies and sorts it all out. So, is it any good? It's okay, I guess. It's difficult to get particularly excited about stories where the majority of the characters act outside of their established character, even if that decision was intentional, because the results tend to be irrelevant with regards to any sort of long-term development. When the resolution of the story is everybody going back to normal, there's rarely room for more. To be fair to the episode, this one's better than some, as it does at least give us a nod to other stuff in established Trek. Today's episode is the origin of what will become Red Alert, a regular refrain in other shows to indicate shit hitting the fan. And that precursor, Reed's so-called tactical alert, also gives us today's complaint for the episode as well, because the gun logic doesn't work. When facing down a rather large fragmenting space rock, Archer says he wants to poop some red at it. T'Pol responds that charging the weapons would take too long, only for the tactical alert to immediately bring them to full readiness a moment later. If that capability exists in an automated system Reed just created, why would the ship's second-in-command have been unable to do the same? T'Pol not being fully versed in the offensive and defensive capabilities of the Enterprise doesn't strike me as plausible, so the idea Reed would have known about a big red emergency weapon charge button when she didn't carries no water for me. We could perhaps argue that the instant charge system is functionality that didn't exist before Reed created it in this episode, but that doesn't make much sense either. The idea that Reed wouldn't have already created that button if it was possible to do simply isn't realistic, especially when you consider that he's had just a few days short of an entire year to do so when you check this episode's date against the one where we first installed those guns. We've established Reed as someone who's very work-oriented and takes his responsibilities extremely seriously. Suggesting he just didn't bother runs contrary to both of those. Even if an instant charge function carried significant additional risks, he'd still want the option in his armory, so to speak. We could also raise the argument that an instant charge being possible essentially undermines every subsequent occasion for needing to ready our weapons, not just in this series, but in all other Trek series as well, or that T'Pol could have just used a bloody firework for that matter, but I think I've made my point, so we'll leave it there. Before we end today's video, I should probably point out there's an entirely incidental detail buried within the episode that has enormous ramifications for one of our main characters. Jonathan Archer is tasked with writing the preface for a biography of his dad, Henry Archer, who was largely responsible for the creation of the Warp 5 engine strapped to our ship. So far, so nepotism, but his draft of that introduction carries a particularly interesting little nugget. No, I'm not talking about the typo at the bottom of the screen, somebody having typed 1 instead of own, but rather something near the top. When discussing the initial research his dad conducted into Warp 5 tech, Archer specifically name-checks Saval, the Vulcan we know as Detective Sykes from Alien Nation. The same guy who's tried to piss on our mission all along, the guy who Archer had a ding-dong with in the very first episode, is one of those who tried to dismiss the Warp 5 project while it was still theoretical, long before it was even tested, developed, built, and stuck onto a ship. And that gives us some very curious things to think about. Archer refers to this as arrogance from the Vulcans, believing they thought his dad's work was flawed. But is that the only possibility? Based on the long-established resistance to our increased exploration, isn't it equally possible they actually knew it was perfectly sound and just tried to bullshit us? The behavior Archer considers a passive-aggressive sense of superiority, a deep-seated Vulcan belief that we human barbarians could never surpass them, could just as easily have been a deliberate misdirection rather than an error on their part. The implications of this possibility are profound. It calls into question every other piece of information we've ever been given by the Vulcans, every guiding hand they've offered. Was it the truth, or just what best served their goals? This incidental detail also helps us to understand just why Archer feels the way he does about Vulcans in general, or at least how he felt when the series started anyway. That belief of being held back by the Vulcans wasn't just some abstract thought for him, an opinion absorbed through osmosis. He had a very clear, very specific face to which he could attach that resentment. As far as Archer's concerned, Detective Sykes from Alien Nation has personally been fucking his family for at least 2 generations now. Whether that was the result of simple haughty arrogance or more nefarious reasons is irrelevant. For Archer, this is a very real, quantifiable thing, his lived experience in relation to a long-running nemesis figure. Does that excuse his behavior towards T'Pol and the others when they met? Of course not. He was a complete dick. But now we understand just how deeply that prejudice was planted during his entire life, and that this same meeting also placed him face to face with the man he considers personally responsible for what happened to his dad. Henry Archer didn't die before seeing his work come to fruition as the result of some nebulous they. It was because of Detective Sykes from Alien Nation, at least in the mind of his son. When Archer said he was exercising restraint in the very first episode, that may have been far more than a simple turn of phrase. A single line buried in a block of text, something likely never even meant to have been read, reframes Archer's behavior for every story we've seen to date, and makes his subsequent reconsideration of his prejudice and acceptance of T'Pol and other Vulcans all the more laudable. End of episode.
A spiritual journey to the canine soul?
No.
Dog psychotherapy to learn more about Porthos?
No.
A talent contest to see who gets to be his voice?
No.
A puppet show about how love is the real universal language?
No, for fuck. These are all shite. You've had an all week to think of what we're gonna do to fill these credit skits, and stuff like this is what you bring to the table.
I already brought something to the table and you shot it down.
You didn't, though, did you? It was just ripping off Zelda.
It's a Star Trek video. Ripping things off is tradition.
Yeah, fair enough, you got me there. But is that the level of quality you want us to aspire to? Good enough for Rick Bloody Berman?
Touché. I'll go and have another think. Woof.